China has collapsed so many times that by normal historical standards, it should not exist anymore. Warlords tore it apart, nomads conquered it, emperors burned books, rebels drowned dynasties in blood, foreign powers carved it open, and revolution nearly destroyed everything again. And yet, China kept coming back. But here's the strangest part. Some of the people who conquered China eventually became Chinese themselves. So how does a civilization get invaded, shattered, humiliated, rebuilt, and still survive for 3,000 years? Let's start at the beginning. Around 3,000 years ago, China was not China the way we think of it today. It was a patchwork of kingdoms, clans, rivers, farms, rituals, bronze weapons, and rulers who claimed the heavens were personally interested in their job performance. The story begins around the Yellow River, where farming communities learned to survive floods, droughts, and each other. This river was both a gift and a disaster machine. It gave people fertile soil, but it also changed course, flooded villages, and occasionally reminded everyone that nature was still in charge. Early Chinese rulers learned a very important lesson. If you can control water, food, and armies, people will probably listen to you. The first dynasty is traditionally called the Xia. The problem is historians are still arguing about how much of it was real and how much was legend. Which is awkward, because every civilization likes to have a clean origin story, and China starts with, well, maybe. Then came the Shang dynasty, and now things become much clearer. The Shang had cities, kings, bronze weapons, chariots, ancestor worship, and oracle bones. Oracle bones were basically ancient customer support tickets to the spirit world. A priest would carve a question onto a turtle shell or animal bone, heat it until it cracked, and then interpret the cracks. Will the harvest be good? Crack. Will the king win this battle? Crack. Should we invade our neighbors? Crack. Apparently, the ancestors were very busy. The Shang kings ruled through religion, war, and family power. They believed dead ancestors could influence the living, which meant politics did not stop when someone died. It just moved underground. Then, around 1046 BC, a western kingdom called Zhou overthrew the Shang, and because simply saying we beat them sounded a bit rude, the Zhou came up with one of the most important ideas in Chinese history, the mandate of heaven. The basic idea was simple. Heaven gives a ruler the right to rule, but if the ruler becomes corrupt, cruel, useless, or unlucky, heaven takes the mandate away and gives it to someone else. This was brilliant. It meant rebellion could be illegal right up until it succeeded. Then suddenly it was destiny. Your Majesty, the peasants are revolting. Tell them rebellion is treason. They say heaven supports them now. Did they win? Not yet. Then it's treason. And if they win, then apparently I was evil the whole time. Exactly. The mandate of heaven became China's political reset button. Dynasty gets strong. Dynasty gets rich. Dynasty gets corrupt. Floods, famine, rebellion. New dynasty arrives and says heaven wanted this. This cycle would repeat for thousands of years. At first, the Zhou were powerful. They handed land to loyal nobles, who promised to obey the king. But over time, those nobles became stronger, richer, and less interested in listening. This happens a lot in history. A king gives powerful men land so they will protect him. Then the powerful men realize they have land, soldiers, money, and no urgent reason to answer the king's messages. By around 770 BC, the Zhou king was still technically important, but mostly in the way a mascot is important. Everyone respected the title while ignoring the person. China entered the spring and autumn period, which sounds peaceful and poetic. It was not. States fought constantly. Alliances formed and broke, nobles plotted, armies grew. Philosophers wandered around trying to explain why everyone was being terrible. And this is where China produced some of its most famous thinkers. Confucius believed society could be fixed through morality, ritual, respect, family duty, and good government. Basically, if everyone knew their place and behaved properly, the world would stop catching fire. Laozi, associated with Taoism, had a very different vibe. He emphasized harmony with the natural way of things, simplicity, and not forcing everything. Then there were the legalists, who looked at humanity and said, these people are awful. We need laws, punishments, rewards, spies, and probably more punishments. Guess which philosophy future emperors found extremely useful? By the 400s BC, China entered the Warring States period. The name is refreshingly honest. This was not the gentle disagreement states. It was war, reform, conquest, and survival. 7 major states fought for control. Each one tried to build better armies, stronger governments, and more efficient tax systems. Warfare became bigger and nastier. Iron weapons spread. Crossbows appeared. Peasant soldiers replaced noble chariot warriors. The old world was dying, and one state was getting terrifyingly good at the new one. Qin. Qin was on the western edge of the Chinese world, and other states looked down on it as rough and uncultured. Big mistake. Qin adopted legalist reforms, organized society for war, rewarded soldiers for taking enemy heads, standardized administration, and turned itself into a conquest machine. Then came King Jing of Qin. He was ruthless, brilliant, paranoid, and exactly the kind of person you do not want holding a large army and a political theory based on punishment. Between 230 and 221 BC, Qin destroyed the other states one by one. For the first time, China was unified under one ruler. King Jing decided king was too small a title, so he created a new one, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. When someone calls himself the first emperor, that is usually a sign he has plans. He standardized weights, measures, currency, writing, axle lengths, laws, and administration. That sounds boring until you realize how important it was. A merchant, official, or soldier could now move through the empire using the same system everywhere. China was no longer just conquered. It was being welded together. But Qin Shi Huang was also terrifying. He burned books associated with rival political traditions. He punished critics brutally. He forced hundreds of thousands of people into massive labor projects. Roads, palaces, canals, walls, tombs. So many walls. Earlier states had built defensive walls against northern nomads, and Qin connected some of them. This was not yet the Great Wall as most people imagine it, but it was an early ancestor of it. And then there was his tomb. Qin Shi Huang prepared for death by building an underground army of thousands of terracotta soldiers. Each one had a different face, because apparently even in the afterlife, this man wanted proper staffing. The strangest part is that he was obsessed with living forever. He sent people searching for immortality and took mercury pills because they were supposed to prolong life. Mercury, famously, does not do that. Your Majesty, the immortality medicine is ready. Excellent. What's in it? Mercury. Is that safe? The alchemist says probably. Probably. He died last week. From what? We are not asking questions. Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BC. The empire immediately started wobbling. His successors were weak, officials schemed, peasants rebelled, and within a few years, the Qin dynasty collapsed. The dynasty that unified China lasted only about 15 years. Awkward. But the system Qin created did not disappear. The idea of a unified empire ruled by a central bureaucracy survived. And the next dynasty would take that machine and make it last. That dynasty was the Han. The Han began after a brutal civil war won by Liu Bang, a man who started as a commoner and somehow ended up emperor. This was very annoying to aristocrats, who generally prefer history not to reward peasants with palaces. The Han softened Qin's harshness but kept much of its structure. Central government, officials, provinces, taxes, roads, law, imperial authority. But now with more Confucian language on top, which made everything sound nicer. Instead of saying, obey or else, the state could say, harmony requires your obedience. Much classier. The Han became one of China's great golden ages. It expanded deep into Central Asia, fought the Xiongnu nomads, developed trade routes that later became known as the Silk Road, and helped define what Chinese civilization meant for centuries. The word Han still matters today. The majority ethnic group in China is called Han Chinese. That is how influential this dynasty became. During this era, Chinese goods moved west, especially silk. In return came horses, ideas, religions, and contact with distant worlds. Chinese envoys reached Central Asia. Trade networks stretched toward Persia, India, and eventually Rome. The Romans loved silk. They had almost no idea where it came from. Somewhere far away, expensive, and mysterious. Which, to be fair, is how luxury branding still works. Han China also invented or improved paper, expanded bureaucracy, and built a state that could outlast individual rulers. But no dynasty escapes the cycle. Over time, powerful families gained influence. Court eunuchs and officials fought for control. Landowners became richer. Peasants became poorer. Taxes became heavier. Floods and famines arrived, because they always do in this story. Then came the Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 AD, a massive peasant uprising inspired by religious movements and fueled by desperation. The Han dynasty staggered. Generals gained power. Warlords carved up the country. By 220 AD, the Han was finished. Then came one of the most famous chaotic periods in Chinese history, the Three Kingdoms. Wei, Shu, and Wu fought over the ruins. This era became legendary because of strategy, betrayal, heroic generals, doomed loyalty, and later, a famous novel that turned the whole thing into one of history's greatest political soap operas. Everyone had a plan. Everyone had a rival. Everyone claimed they were restoring order. Very little order was restored. China would remain divided for centuries through the Jin dynasty, northern and southern dynasties, nomadic invasions, short-lived states, and endless power struggles. This is one of the key patterns in Chinese history. Unification creates an empire. The empire weakens. Regional powers rise. Northern invaders push in. Southern elites preserve culture. Eventually, someone reunites the country and claims heaven has made a decision. By 589 AD, that someone was the Sui dynasty. The Sui reunited China after centuries of division. They rebuilt central authority and launched huge projects, most famously the Grand Canal, which connected northern and southern China and helped move grain, soldiers, and taxes across the empire. This was incredibly useful. It was also incredibly expensive. The Sui forced millions into labor, launched disastrous wars against Korea, exhausted the population, and collapsed after only a few decades. So, yes, they reunited China and then immediately overdid it. Classic. Then came the Tang dynasty in 618, and China entered another golden age. The Tang capital, Chang'an, was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities on earth. Merchants, monks, diplomats, musicians, and travelers arrived from across Asia. Buddhism flourished. Poetry reached incredible heights. The empire expanded. Culture boomed. If the Han helped define China, the Tang made it glamorous. But underneath the shine, the same old problems were warming up backstage. The Tang relied on powerful military governors to control frontier regions. This seemed practical until one of those governors, An Lushan, decided he would rather be emperor. In 755, he launched a rebellion that nearly destroyed the dynasty. The An Lushan rebellion was catastrophic. Tens of millions may have died from war, famine, and disruption, though exact numbers are debated. The Tang survived, but badly weakened. Military governors gained more power. The court lost control. Rebellions spread. By 907, the Tang collapsed. China broke apart again. Then, after another messy period, the Song dynasty emerged in 960. The Song is one of the most fascinating dynasties because it was incredibly advanced and also constantly bullied. Economically, technologically, and culturally, Song China was extraordinary. Cities exploded in size. Commerce expanded. Paper money appeared. Printing spread books and knowledge. Gunpowder weapons developed. The compass improved navigation. Iron production soared. In some ways, Song China was the most sophisticated society on earth. Militarily, however, it had a problem. Northern nomadic empires kept taking territory and demanding payment. The Song often preferred diplomacy and money over endless war, which made sense, but also made them look weak to neighbors with horses and very sharp opinions. Your Majesty, the Northern Empire demands tribute. Again. Yes. What if we pay them? We did that last year. And did they invade? Not fully. Excellent. Send more silk. This worked until it didn't. In the 1200s, the Mongols arrived. And the Mongols were not interested in polite border management. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols conquered much of Eurasia. Northern China fell first. Then Kublai Khan turned toward the Song in the south. The Song resisted fiercely. They had fortified cities, rivers, ships, and advanced weapons. But the Mongols adapted. They hired Chinese engineers, built fleets, learned siege warfare, and slowly crushed Song resistance. In 1279, the Song fell. For the first time, all of China was ruled by foreigners, the Mongol Yuan dynasty. Kublai Khan became emperor of China, but this created a strange problem. The Mongols had conquered China, but now they had to govern it. And China had a habit of changing the people who ruled it. The Yuan kept Mongols above Chinese subjects in the social hierarchy, but they also adopted Chinese-style administration, ruled from a Chinese capital, and became part of the imperial tradition. This is the weird survival trick. China could be conquered militarily, but culturally it was extremely hard to digest. Invaders often ended up using Chinese institutions, Chinese officials, Chinese taxes, Chinese rituals, and Chinese ideas of rulership. The empire swallowed its conquerors from the inside. But Yuan rule became unpopular. Heavy taxes, ethnic divisions, corruption, floods, famine, and disease weakened the dynasty. Rebellions broke out. One rebel leader was Zhu Yuanzhang, who had started life as a poor peasant, became a monk, joined a rebellion, and somehow climbed all the way to emperor. In 1368, he drove out the Mongols and founded the Ming dynasty. The Ming was China restored, and Zhu Yuanzhang, now the Hongwu emperor, was determined to make sure nobody ruined it. Unfortunately, he was also deeply paranoid. He executed officials by the thousands, centralized power, and created one of the most controlling governments China had ever seen. But the Ming also rebuilt agriculture, restored Chinese rule, strengthened the Great Wall, and sent out one of the most impressive naval expeditions in history. In the early 1400s, Admiral Zheng He led enormous treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean. These ships reached Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. They were massive, impressive, and announced that Ming China was rich, powerful, and very much open for prestige. Trade concessions expanded. China was still enormous, but it was no longer untouchable. And then the inside exploded. The Taiping Rebellion began in 1850, led by Qin Shi Huang, a failed exam candidate who came to believe he was the younger brother of Jesus. Yes. Really, he built a massive religious rebel movement and nearly toppled the Qing. The war became one of the deadliest in human history, killing perhaps 20 to 30 million people. Your Majesty, there is a rebellion. How bad? The leader says he is related to Jesus. That sounds manageable. He has millions of followers. That sounds less manageable. He captured Nanjing. I'm going to sit down. The Qing survived, but only by relying on regional armies and local elites. That saved the dynasty in the short term while weakening central power in the long term. Then came more disasters. Defeat by France. Defeat by Japan in 1895. Foreign spheres of influence. The Boxer Rebellion in 1900, where anti-foreign fighters attacked missionaries and foreigners, only for an international army to invade and punish China again. The Qing tried reforms, but it was late. Very late. By 1911, revolution broke out. The last emperor, Puyi, was a child. In 1912, the Qing dynasty fell. More than 2,000 years of imperial rule ended. China became a republic. Great news, right? Not really. The new Republic of China was weak. Sun Yat-sen, the revolutionary leader, wanted nationalism, democracy, and people's welfare. But military strongman Yuan Shikai took power, tried to make himself emperor, failed, and then died. After that, China fractured into warlordism. Generals ruled regions like private kingdoms. Armies marched. Taxes were squeezed from peasants. Foreign powers still held privileges. The country had a flag and a government, but not much control. Meanwhile, two major political forces grew. The nationalists, or Kuomintang, wanted to unify China under a modern state. The communists wanted revolution for workers and peasants. At first, they cooperated. Then they started killing each other. This was not ideal teamwork. Chiang Kai-shek became leader of the nationalists and launched campaigns to reunify China. The communists, including Mao Zedong, were nearly wiped out and forced into the Long March, a brutal retreat across thousands of miles. It became a founding myth of Chinese communism. Then Japan invaded. In 1931, Japan seized Manchuria. In 1937, full-scale war erupted. Japanese forces captured major cities and committed horrific atrocities, including the Nanjing massacre. China suffered enormously during World War II. Millions died. Cities were bombed. Refugees fled. The nationalists and communists formed an uneasy alliance against Japan, but neither forgot the civil war waiting underneath. When Japan surrendered in 1945, China was exhausted. Then the civil war resumed. The nationalists had international recognition and larger cities. The communists had rural support, discipline, and momentum. By 1949, Mao's communist forces won. Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists fled to Taiwan. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the People's Republic of China. A new China had arrived, and it was about to transform everything again. Mao promised to end humiliation, rebuild the country, and create a socialist society. Land reform redistributed land but also brought violence against landlords. The Communist Party centralized power. Opposition was crushed. Then came the Great Leap Forward in 1958, Mao's attempt to rapidly transform China into an industrial and agricultural superpower. It went catastrophically wrong. Communes were created. Backyard furnaces tried to produce steel. Grain production numbers were exaggerated because local officials were afraid to tell the truth. The state took grain based on false numbers. Then famine spread. Tens of millions died. It was one of the worst man-made disasters in history. Chairman, the steel production is rising. Good. Some of it is melted farm tools, still steel, and the harvest numbers, excellent. Are they real? They are politically enthusiastic. That is not the same thing. No, it is not. Then, in 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, calling on young people to attack old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. Red Guards humiliated teachers, officials, intellectuals, and even party members. Families turned on each other. Schools closed. Chaos spread. Mao eventually died in 1976. China had survived empire, invasion, civil war, revolution, famine, and ideological chaos. Then came Deng Xiaoping. Deng did something that changed the world. He kept Communist Party control but opened China's economy to markets, trade, private enterprise, and foreign investment. His basic idea was practical. It does not matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Translation: stop arguing theory and start getting rich. Special economic zones opened. Factories multiplied. Foreign companies arrived. Hundreds of millions of people moved from villages to cities. China became the workshop of the world. The speed was astonishing. A country that had been poor and isolated became the second largest economy on earth. Cities rose almost overnight. High-speed rail spread. Technology companies grew. The world's supply chains wrapped themselves around Chinese manufacturing. But political control never disappeared. In 1989, 1889, protests in Tiananmen Square called for reform and greater freedom. The government crushed them. The message was clear: economic change, yes. Party rule, no negotiation. In the decades after, China grew richer, stronger, and more confident. Hong Kong returned from Britain in 1997. Macau returned from Portugal in 1999. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, accelerating its rise even further. Today, China is a global power with massive cities, a huge economy, advanced technology, a powerful military, and enormous influence. But the old patterns have not completely vanished. Unity still matters deeply. The memory of foreign humiliation still shapes politics. The state still fears disorder. The idea that chaos leads to collapse is not some abstract theory in Chinese history. It happened again and again and again. That is the key to understanding China. For 3,000 years, the story has been a cycle: unity, prosperity, corruption, pressure, rebellion, collapse, reunification. The names changed: Shang, Zhou, Qin, Han, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, Republic, People's Republic. But the question stayed the same: how do you hold together a civilization this old, this large, and this complicated? China's answer was never perfect. Sometimes it was brilliant. Sometimes it was brutal. Sometimes it was both at the exact same time. And that is why China survived. Not because it never collapsed. Because every time it did, someone rebuilt it and claimed heaven, history, ideology, or the people had chosen them to do it. China's story does not end with emperors, communists, factories, or skyscrapers. It is still being written right now. But if you want to understand why modern China thinks the way it does, you have to understand the cycle that shaped it. Collapse was never the end. It was just the beginning of the next dynasty. And if you think China's rise was intense, wait until you see how Japan went from isolated samurai islands to one of the most powerful empires in Asia. Click here for that story, and I'll catch you next time.